and welcome to 1985 Chelsea Flower Show. I'm joined by Alan Titchmarsh, and we hope to bring you the highlights from this year's show. And there are some really marvellous things here, Alan.
I think everybody thought after that really hard winter that maybe this year's Chelsea would be just a little bit down. Not a bit of it. The gardeners and growers have really come back with a vengeance to prove this year is better than ever.
And I think the clematis, the delphiniums, some of those plants which have opened slowly have a sort of extra bit of colour and extra bit of size, really quite eye-catching. And the gardens outside, pretty spectacular.
Not bad too. I'm looking forward to having a look at some of the inside work. I've been out there making a garden. I'm only too glad I've got out of my dirty clothes and got rid of that squeaking wheelbarrow to have a look at what is coming on here in this floral feast.
And the social season starts with the arrival of Her Majesty the Queen for her very special preview. Accompanied by Princess Anne, they're greeted by the President of the Royal Horticultural Society, Mr. Robin Herbert and Mrs. Herbert. Princess Michael and Charles Knockhat, busy discussing plants. And Princess Margaret with John Hillier. It's a very popular event for all the royal family, and a number of them enthusiastic gardeners. President Emeritus Lord Aberconway with his fellow judges making their final decisions, and every exhibitor awaits with eager anticipation in the hope of meeting Her Majesty the Queen. And Alan had quite a day, meeting the Queen and winning a gold medal. There's some marvellous pictures for the family album, and I hope nobody rubs the video off. It's only those people who've worked hard and won a gold medal that know what they're worth, so my congratulations to you. And it's lovely to see this sort of cottage garden feel spreading pretty well through the side, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's a bit of fun. It's a way in a tiny plot of cramming an awful lot in without it looking too much of a mess. And I hope I've managed to show how you can tooth vegetables and fruits in with your flowers to get a garden that looks good, smells good, and tastes good as well.
And I can see those youngsters on Teacher's Patch just throwing the little pebbles in the pond. Come on.
Oh, well, they can pick them out again as well. But, you know, I've been so busy on here with my nose down to the gravel, I've noticed vaguely what's been going on in the other gardens, but now I'm going to go and have a closer look. My garden's one of the smallest at 20 feet by 40, but Guy Farthing's is the largest, 40 feet by 72. But nevertheless, that's not awfully big, and his brief has been to cram as much into a small space as possible. And so he's got in all kinds of things, but he's based it on hexagons, from the hexagonal butterfly sundial through a hexagonal herb garden and down a path that's even made up of hexagonal slabs. A shed, a greenhouse, a vegetable garden, fruit over here, made into a very bonny pattern with just 4 little trees handsomely trained. And then an imposing bit of statuary by Marion Smith, and planting behind it that sensibly relies on flowers as well as foliage. The flowers are here today and gone tomorrow. The leaves last a little bit longer. But something which will keep you interested most of the year, and particularly in summer when it's decorated with a water lily, is a garden pool. Again, very well planted up round the edge. Now, I never like to take in an entire garden at one look, so a bridge to lift you up and make your eye look round the corner is a great feature as far as I'm concerned, and so too is this. Outside the back door, if you like, somewhere to come on a summer's day and enjoy the smell of burning sausages. Any time of year, though, for the start of the garden pool, where the water bubbles over from one top hexagon into a lower one below. Water playing on the surface and fish darting across the bottom out of the way of the weather. Ray Bird, who designed the award-winning British garden at the Liverpool International Garden Festival, has here designed a garden for a national newspaper. It takes the living accommodation right out into the garden with the planting overlapping the brickwork. You can make your way past colourful borders of foliage and flowers to a Norfolk mardle seat. It's a Norfolk word that means gossip, so here you can sit and gossip among the rhododendrons. This, he says, is a garden that's vibrant in the spring, softening into summer restfulness, and then mellowing with autumnal tints as the days shorten.
Chelsea Show attracts 250,000 visitors each year. What is it, come rain or shine, that makes them pour through the turnstiles?
I just love the atmosphere of watching other gardeners loving plants, I think.
And we're planning a wild garden
and we've come to sort of see what's the latest of that. And
Coming for the last 10 years, haven't we?
we've been coming for 10 years, and we like to come and see the roses and that.
Well, I haven't been before, and I've come because I enjoy seeing the, well, I hope to see nice flowers and the patios and particularly the colours and things from my own garden.
Whatever the weather, they always seem to manage to have the right sort of combination of plants for the amateur. I think provided you don't try and go home disappointed when you see what the professionals can do, at least it gives the amateur guidelines and things like that.
It's no idle boast to say that at Chelsea Flower Show you can find the best flowers in the world. And this huge stand of orchids comes from Britain. The British Orchid Growers Association are this year celebrating their centenary. So 8 orchid growers have got together to bring the very best of their stock and put it on the stand. It's devastating. You can see long arching sprays of cymbidiums, the phalaenopsis or moth orchids. The sprays on those seem to float almost in mid-air. And then the rather brash and smiling faces of the pansy orchid. There's such a variety in the orchid kingdom that you really can't despise all of them. At least one of them must take your fancy. Well, they say that one orchid in your buttonhole makes you look $1 million. This huge collection here, the like of which I've never seen before, is worth more than £1 million. Wish I had just one of them.
Roses are one of the most popular of all garden flowers, and they play a major role at this show. More than a dozen specialist rose nurseries vie with one another to attract the judge's eye, and even more important, orders from us, the customer. Each company develops its own style over the years, and many are instantly recognised by the equipment they use. But be careful. Remember, all the roses have been grown under glass, and so some of the colours are a little bit lighter than in your own garden. 2 companies had to cancel out at the very last moment. But this company, 50% larger than usual, the roses grown in Hitchin. And very traditional, this style, but I mean, it comes from Yorkshire. You'd expect good traditional things, wouldn't you? Even a new rose called Catherine Cook's.
Well, she's a best-selling novelist. Let's wait and see if this turns into a best-selling rose. Patience.
Well, I think that, if you come from Yorkshire, then you need a good white rose. And this is the Rose of the Year by the Rose Growers, Polar Star. Lovely foliage, good strong growth, that.
But just for me, a little bit too fat. I like something a little bit more delicate. So I'm afraid I'd have to turn away from the real pure white of Yorkshire and go for Lady Romsey with just a touch of peach in there. This time a floribunda, good foliage and a gentle scent.
Well, I'm not sure about having a pink Yorkshireman, but I mean, this is a bit of a mix-up too, because this is called Peace Sunblaze, and it isn't like peace and it isn't like sunblaze.
It is like an old-fashioned shrub rose with that green button eye in the centre there, and some little blighter.
Lovely foliage, just now making some growth in a small pot.
But, if you want a miniature rose that's got a better name than that you can remember, then you've got to go for this one. Deep Crimson Pot Black, it's called. Even good in the shade, they tell me.
You've been having too much airtime this week. It's going to your head, I think this Bright Spark just about sums you
Oh,
up.
very appropriate. Yes, no. For me, I would far rather go for this. Now, they say every leading man who plays with Felicity Kendall falls in love with her. So let's wait and see how many gardeners fall in love with this beautiful coral red hybrid tea rose. All right, I know it's hybrid tea, but it is a very good bloom.
Could replace Superstar, and I suppose, Felicity Kendall is a superstar.
She is, and the foliage looks very disease resistant.
Well, then how about Rosemary Harkness? A young lady was just 25 yesterday, and I'm told she's of generous nature, as this bush is, It's fragrant, grows well, and lots of flowers.
A bit younger than you. I like to see a good pink flower, but I think it's just beaten that one for me by this. My old-fashioned predilections, and this is a new old-fashioned shrub rose called Sir Walter Raleigh, to commemorate Operation Raleigh. And it's got a flower that's beautifully scented and looks almost like a peony.
Well, I think this flower shape's not bad either. And this is called The Times.
Bit of a vulgar colour for the Times, that.
Well, and it's come from Germany. I'm not sure what, some of the old fellas from the Times will think of a German rose, but it's got a very good rose.
I can see you going into your garden. Just say to the wife, I'm just going into the garden to cut a bunch of thunderer.
Perduce, another novelty. And what parents? Nana Muscuri crossed with Lolita. And a real gimmick to catch the eye as a stalk, baby and cradle, designed by Kees van Drill. He's the fellow who for 25 years has been designing the floats on the Spalding Flower Parade, and with his father, the Dutch parades too. A lovely, strong growing rose. And Singapore, they brought their trishaws and lanterns. And of course a tremendous trade, growing cut orchids and flying them to all parts of the world. Another eye catcher, and this time an iced cake of pinks. And the 5, that's because it's the 5th year anniversary. This pink specialist has been coming to Chelsea 4 or 5 years, and they were particularly worried about the candles on the cake. It was the colour of the flame at the top, but fortunately they had just enough of the right varieties. And they're interested too in the old types, the old white fringed pink. And it was crosses of perpetual carnations onto this, which gave us the perpetual flowering pinks of today that flower right the way through the summer and into early autumn. A brand new one, introduced at the show, Jennifer Wyatt, a very subtle shade of pink. No gimmick this, but a masterful and eye-catching use of carpet bedding from Torbay Parks Department. Do you remember 2 years ago they gave us that lovely heather-thatched Devon cottage, and last year the guardsman on a horse. And this year, because they're twinned with the German city of Hamelin, it's the Pied Piper of Hamelin. And goodness, what an eye they have for detail. The River Weser with the blue cinerarias and Sugar Daddy Petunia. And the rats with the lovely small grey-leaved sedum as a body. And moss sphagnum. You can almost hear the flute. Torbay is just one of a very strong but you can always pick out the Birmingham people because of the colour coordination. They really know how to blend all those pinks. And they mix too, the sort of coral pink poinsettia with almost mauvey pink impatiens. And it has a marvellous effect. On the corner, then it goes from really huge specimens with a and if you're so sculpture and bedding scheme. Once the plants have served their purpose here, they'll be off to be used again in the parks through the summer. Part of the collection of cacti and succulents from Aberdeen. Some feat this, bringing 600 miles, those great tall cactus. And we've just heard they've been invited to stage the big exhibit around the monument next year. So this could well prove something of a dress rehearsal, and they'll have to bring the whole collection down next year. They think too that they have the finest catalogue at the show. It's been part of a community project under Manpower Services Commission. Hand-painted prints of a whole series of cactus and succulents in catalogue form.
You don't have to be a keen gardener to enjoy Chelsea. You can come just to look at the colour on delphiniums taller than you are, exhibited by this Bristol firm. Come Friday, you can even buy one to take away if you can get it on the tube without losing its top. Mind you, you'd be lucky to get as far as the main gate without losing the blooms on these tuberous begonias. They really are as big as tea plates, but even the experts make mistakes. That one up there in the hanging basket, called Bridal, when they were staging it, they dropped it right on its head. Not to worry, they looked round, picked it up, dusted it off, stood it back up there, and now nobody knows the difference. It's still blooming brilliant. But there's even greater blooming brilliance from the rhododendrons here. A brand new, dinky little Yakushi-Maynham hybrid called Pink Bumble. And also on the stand of Jean Reuter, a little evergreen azalea called Petty Chaps. But if you garden on chalk, then rhododendrons and azaleas aren't much use to you. Far better to stick to something like clematis because it adores alkaline soil. And on this stand, you can see 2,000 potfuls massed together. But you know, you see 2,000 potfuls massed together. See 2,000 potfuls massed together. See 2,000 potfuls massed together. But you know, you can see 2,000 potfuls. And on this stand, you can see 2,000 potfuls massed together. But you know, you can do this kind of thing at home. You don't have to grow clematis up the fence. You can do as the Victorians did. Fill your border with sticks and bits of old tree, plant your clematis through them, and let them scramble over the top to give you blooms at waist height. And you'll get the same effect by growing clematises in and over the top to give you blooms at waist height, and you'll get the same effect by growing at waist height, and you'll get the same effect by growing clematis in an urn. Order with sticks and bits of old tree, plant your clematis through them and let them scramble over the top to give you blooms at waist height. Scramble over the top to give you blooms at waist height, and you'll get the same effect by growing clematis through them and let them scramble over the top to give you blooms at waist height, and you'll get the same effect. Old tree, plant your clematis through them and let them scramble over the top to give you blooms at waist height, and you'll get the same effect by growing clematis in an urn. Not a bad technique, is it? But if you really want the novelty of the clematis world, then you've got to go for a new variety called Royalty. So called because it first flowered on the day the Prince and Princess of Wales were married. Ah, there's a nice story. But the clematis world isn't the only one where the double varieties are coming to the fore. Look at African violets nowadays and you'll find doubles there as well. But you've got to be a bit careful how you choose them. Some of them have names you might not want to mention. This one's all right. Porcelain, but go to a deeper purple edge and then you're on to fancy pants. Never mind, you can always go for the one that will cope with the tiniest windowsill, pipsqueak and its other relations, the micro African violets. Now, daffodil growing can often be tricky at Chelsea Flower Show. It's a bit late in the season to show them, but Michael Jefferson Brown, who's celebrating his 25 years in the business this year, has brought with him over 120 varieties. He's quite pleased because he hasn't had such a high fuel bill this year. Usually, he's got to keep them in cold storage for about 14 weeks. This year, it's only been 8 or 10, which just goes to show the cold spring has actually benefited some growers.
Colour coordination, the backbone of this business, founded by the late Mrs. Desmond Underwood. And she was a tremendous enthusiast for all those grey and silver foliage plants, usually arranging them with pinks. And the oxeye daisy, the Chrysanthemum funiculaceum, just the thing to grow in tubs. It'll flower right the way through the summer. And a knot garden. Notice how the box goes right underneath the Santolina. That's the way to plant it, and grown in 6-inch deep plastic tubs. The brainchild of Simon and Judith Hopkinson. They've suddenly found themselves thrust into the fashion for herbs, and it's a matter of tempering that enthusiasm with the practical, making sure we have the right flowers and foliage, and also the right leaves for cooking, the chives, the sage, and the thymes. There's tremendous interest in attracting wildlife into the garden, and Chris Baines has that very much in mind. Fortunately, he had a great big tree in the middle of the site and made full use of that, and introduced a pool so that he attracts the frogs, the toads and all those water-loving creatures. But then when it comes to the bees, the blue forget-me-nots, and a very useful plant, the broad bean, the bees love that and it's productive too. And then the purple lavender shades of honesty, which attracts the butterfly, and if you leave it, there are seed heads for the bullfinches. And we've even attracted to the bird table a wood pigeon, which has taken up residence. It's getting so fat, the table begins to lean one way. And just next door, then an aviary with exotic birds, because the theme of the garden is sanctuary, and the birds add that extra dimension.
From high flyers to high society, and a corner of a garden in the classical style, sponsored by a glossy fashion magazine. Triton's head spurts water into a shell, while topiary-filled urns sit on majestic balustrading. The emphasis here has been on scent rather than colour, and also on spectacle rather than economy. Illusion and perspective in a small town garden was the intention of a group of sculptors and plantsmen in making this glittering grotto. The director of the V&A, Sir Roy Strong, has complained of the lack of artistic invention at Chelsea. I wonder what he'll make.
Two gardens in one exhibit. The garden's designed by Faith and Jeff Whiten, sponsored by a building society. And the idea here is that there would be one cheap and fairly simple garden for a young family and a much more sophisticated garden. I think the grandparents must have provided the rather flash table and chairs, but the rest of the first garden could be built, the pergolas and the grass sown and the paving laid, and of course the sandpit made for the young children by a young family. Children may even sow a few seeds along the narrow border, although I'd certainly want to keep them well away from the golden splendour lilies. Much more sophisticated, perhaps for Grandma and Grandad, is the second garden. Fully paved, so there's no grass to mow. Beautiful homemade timber bridge and some very sophisticated planting.
Tranquility is the theme of Paul Temple's garden, based on Victorian colonialism. You can wander from the summer house, past a waterway, to a pair of herons designed by Lorne McKean. Here you can find plants from all 5 continents and some from the Himalayas, Japan and China. Wander on past cobbles and large boulders to a gazebo where the Victorian lady could perhaps pause for a spot of tiffin.
There are two, a nice flower range.
The craftsmanship too. Take a look at the implements, waxed to give it, it says, a longer life. A longer life, and I reckon this is the kind of thing with, you know, nice smooth handle. Go with pot black, that.
Well, now the latest thing is that these tiny white crystals, you just have a little pot like that full of them and they absorb that amount of water, goes into jelly. If you mix that with your hanging basket compost, holds the moisture, so you don't have to water them quite so often in the summer. But there's some argument about just how effective it is. In the winter, it can hold too much water.
I think I might get that confused with wallpaper paste with dire results and my paper had come off. No, I'm going to go for this because I get told off for having milk bucket edge. So here's a in the milk.
Caterpillars on your cabbage garden, didn't I? And so how about this?
I thought I picked them off.
Spray it quickly and it kills everything on your vegetables.
Yes, but you've got to mix it up. So if you're a real idler, you see, you go for one of these. Ready mixed inside this gun, little nozzle, you turn, you squeeze the handle, it never settles, you just turn it on and away you go.
Well, you know, I'm a great do-it-yourself expert. You know that, don't you?
Oh, come on. You are to do it yourself what Cyril Smith is to hang gliding. Look,
yes,
what do we do?
Well, you just get that screwed in there, look, and it's tongue and groove boarding. They all just fit one inside the other. It only takes you about 20 minutes, and if you're as skilled as me, you have a really nice tub, lasts for about 15 years, tannalised timber.
It looks fairly good. I reckon after you'd built that, you'd probably be ready for a rest. So here you are. Just what you need, a garden seat to sit on, and then when you fancy you've got enough strength for a bit of weeding, you turn it up the other way, put the rubber mat on, and off you go. Good for your housemaids near man of your age.
You've been trying to get me on my knees all day, but if you're a little short fella like you and you can't reach the hanging baskets, well then this is what you need, a pump up water. You know, you just pump the handle, and out she comes,
Very
6 or 8
efficient.
feet up in the air.
I'd rather just sit down while I did it, and for that, I'd need one of these, you see. Here's my tap. That goes on there, clip it on, my hosepipe's out here, turn the tap on and set the timer. And it'll turn the hosepipe off after anything between 15 and 120 minutes. Smashing time saver.
So I could have it to put under this, could I? Because this is just a series of hose with all kinds of drip feeds. You could put it from tub to tub and I can go away for the weekend with your timer.
We keep on doing gadgets like this, we don't need to do any gardening at all. I bet your weeping fig isn't as big as this one. A new variety from Belgium called Golden King. It'll be on sale in the shops here in September. This monster, though, they saw here in September. This monster, though, they saw at the Ghent Floralies only a month in September. This monster, though, they saw at the sale in the shops here in September. This monster, though, they saw at the Ghent Floralies only a month ago. What they didn't see was this new Diefenbach here, or dumb cane, called Wilson Delight. Big green leaves means it's good for shade, and white midribs almost like Swiss chard. Not quite as colourful, though, as those Neoregelias, or pineapple relatives, down in front. And if you're a bit tired of your boring old rubber plant, and even this green Ficus diversifolia doesn't do anything for you, keep your eyes open for a new variety down here, a variegated one called Perle de Botelar. The name might be a bit of a mouthful, but the plant itself is a real eyeful. From the tropical rainforests of Trinidad and Tobago come exotic blooms by the hundred. Waxy painter's palettes or anthuriums, the upright spiky cockades of heliconias, and this year a new species, Heliconia pendula, with its dangling red and yellow parrot bills. You'll not see a strelitzia finer or more delicate than this one, nor will you find a flower that lasts any longer than the ginger lily. It may be a bit pricey, but when you cut it and put it in water, it lasts for a good 10 weeks. Now that really isn't bad value for money. And these are pretty good value too, the flowers of South Africa. I feel rather like a cinema rusherette here, matches, cigarettes, ices, but I'd far rather have this little collection, the proteas and ericas you'd expect from South Africa, but also the leucadendrons with their tightly furled leaves coated with silvery, silky hairs. Pam Simcock has done her usual marvellous job on the stand this year and rightly won a gold medal. But compare her rounded arrangements with those of a Scandinavian who also took part. Much squarer, straighter lines. A bit of difference there from your average bunch of flowers.
Chelsea's the perfect source of gardening information. Everywhere there are skilled staff to provide answers to questions on every possible subject. But at the gardens of the Royal Horticultural Society, down in Wisley in Surrey, they're proffering advice to members all the year round. Chris Brickell is Director General, and I asked him what are the aims of the Society.
Well, the aims really are the improvement of horticulture in all its branches. That, in a nutshell, is what we are here to do, both in the Vincent Square offices and at Wisley.
Lots of visitors, when they go past the big house, wonder what's happening in there.
Everyone thinks it's a very old house. In fact, it's only about 1916. It was built for the RHS, a copy of an Elizabethan manor house. It's the scientific advisory and administrative staffs are in there. And of course, in the old days, way before the war, relatively few visitors came to Wisley. We used to send out a little pony and trap to the local station to collect any visitor who rang up to say they wanted to visit the garden.
Those days are far gone.
Oh yes, it's 500,000 visitors now.
But then and now, trials were quite important, I think. You have a big area down to testing plants.
Trials have always been part of the Society's work, and a very important part, because they are showing people the range of plants that's available. We're looking at them as what actually people can grow in their gardens. Within the garden here, there's a range of small gardens, fruit, vegetable, model gardens, to show people how they can actually do it on a small scale. And we're trying here to ensure that people don't just come and feel that we're a big feudal estate. We're not. We're here for people.
But you have those beautiful spectacles too. I mean, that lovely Battleston Hill with the trees, and then the rock garden. I mean, quite magnificent.
Well, yes, but even there, if you look at the design that we're gradually getting into various areas of the garden, you could extract for yourself one of those little bits and reproduce something similar in your own garden.
Yes. And then back at Chelsea, the Wisley staff very much in evidence answering those questions.
In the old days, when I first used to do that, we had a little Punch and Judy box, and it was just about big enough for two people, and one would pop up and answer a question, and then the other one would come up. But nowadays, we've got a slightly more modern approach. Anything to do with gardening, we try and answer.
So, if you'd like to send us a piece of Wisley which has got fruit on it, when it fruits.
Right. Okay.
Yes, there's a new book on geraniums, hardy geraniums, just about to come out.
But it's suddenly gone like this. I mean, I just wondered that that lining was some disease or whatever, or some insect.
Now, there are people who consider cherry trees to be vulgar, and they vent their spleen in particular on that variety called Kanzan, which is a bit overplanted as a street tree and does tend to make a rather ungainly upright shuttlecock. But here, in the corner of the stand of one of the country's leading tree and shrub growers, look at its habit now. Much better, because in fact it's been grown in a tub for the past 12 years. So there's something to try at home if you don't actually want it in the street. But if you're still unconvinced by the cherry, just walk this way. Now, dressed like this, I feel I ought to lapse into underneath the arches, but this is an archway the likes of which Flanagan and Allen have never seen. No cobblestones underneath, instead grass to enable you to walk through, and the laburnum arch appeared at Chelsea last year with water underneath it to reflect these long, long flower trails, but now you can really get a closer look. Come and examine the plants yourself. They're about 8 years old, fairly strapping things, being grown in pots for the last 5, and in spite of the fact that they feed them furiously every week, they still can't get the full 18-inch long flower trail. Never mind, still looks pretty spectacular to me, and I reckon a marvellous place to dream your dreams away.
Iceland poppies. Each year the petals seem to get more crinkled, the colours seem to get richer and the flowers larger and a better range of colours, and all from a packet of seeds sown in summer that will stand the rigours of winter and endless blooms to cut. And the fuchsias. They're increasing in popularity too, because once they start to flower at this time of year, they go on and on and on. Don't be afraid to pinch the tips to make them break. But if you want plants on a tall stem as standards, then take the cuttings in August. Geraniums, well, zonal pelargoniums really, and this variety, happy thoughts, and it is a happy plant too. But this particular exhibit is offering cuttings which have been specially chemically treated so that the standards grow very quickly. You can get them in weeks rather than months. And the pitcher plant on the Carnivorous Plant Society's stand, that'll actually eat small frogs and reptiles, so no fingers there. And gardeners will love this, the butterwort that eats whitefly.
Alongside the old stagers, you'll find the new boys to Chelsea who've never exhibited here before. This is the very first entry from Ireland. It comes from the Belfast Parks Department. It's a confection of scented stocks, tobacco plants, white petunias and emerald green maidenhair ferns. You could be forgiven for thinking that it smacks entirely of the Emerald Isle, but no, they say, this is Paradise Island. The Scots will be out to disprove that. This is the third time here for Glasgow Parks Department, and after 2 silver gilts, this time they're definitely growing for gold. Again with a green and white theme, but bolder plants here, mop-headed hydrangeas, variegated-leaved hostas, and at the end of that green swirl of dominoes, a swirl of lilies, as powerful in fragrance as they are in floral impact. Peter Chan's a relative newcomer to the world of exhibition bonsai, but he's taken it by storm and won yet another gold medal. Among his collection, you'll find an ancient larch tree dug up originally from a Scottish bog, and this year, little accent plantings, lumps of rock in shallow basins with a bit of weed for company. But it's hard work to win a gold medal. Peter Chan has no summer holidays. He has to water his trees 3 times a day. There's rock too among the alpines on the stand put together by Will and Paul Ingwerson. Here it acts as a softening foil for brilliant flowers of Lewisias. This is an old established firm, famous for over 50 years. Indeed, Will Ingwerson's father accompanied the legendary Reginald Farrer on some of his plant collecting trips. But even that firm is a mere stripling when compared with the Dutch bulb growers who this year are celebrating their centenary with a stupendous array of flowers. They've brought over a brand new muscari called Sapphire, which has sterile flowers that last far longer in the garden. And they've also brought with them some old bulb growing tools like this 3-pronged pitchfork, which was used for throwing straw over newly planted hyacinths. This rather large V-shaped hoe was for chopping off the dead tops of tulips once they'd faded, and then you could harvest your crocus corms with this sort of elongated flower scoop. But there's bad news in bulb growing too. For when you spotted a diseased hyacinth growing in the field, you got out this strange-looking implement, pushed it right down, and it brought up the soil as well as the bulb, just to make sure the rest of the plantation stayed healthy. And that certainly is what it has done for the past 100 years, if this display's anything to go by.
Bad weather ruins some events, but it doesn't matter who they are. British gardeners defy the rain. Penelope Keith, what does Chelsea mean to you?
It mainly means I've got to go home and work harder.
You don't mean that seriously?
Yes, I do. I've been lucky enough now, this is the second year running I've come. I hadn't been once or twice before. but it just takes my breath away.
I was here a little while, well, about 3 years ago. I came on the last day and carried away thousands of plants. I could hardly move. But it's usually a bit crowded for me, but I love it. It's the most wonderful place.
Doreen, my wife, makes dolls' houses. And we thought it'd be a nice idea to get a doll's house and surround it with bonsai trees, and it would be a very effective thing.
Black fritillarias from Russia brought to the show by Beth Chatto, who started to build her gardening reputation with arranging flowers and cultivated a garden to support the interest. And now she has an exquisite garden and nurseries in Essex, a mecca for gardeners and flower arrangers alike. But last winter, some 40% of her plants that were grown in hot, dry spots with grey foliage were killed. And right up to the last few days, Beth was very worried about the stand. But as usual, it's up to her very high standards. Dr. and Mrs. Barker made their reputation with the find of one bright red-flowered potentilla, and now they have a thriving nursery specialising in the less common and really unusual plants, trees, shrubs, herbaceous and alpines.
The Garden of England is the theme of the National Farmers Union exhibit, and if, like me, you're one of those schoolboys who could always remember hops, wheat, sugar beet, but were never quite sure where they all came from, this map should put you right. Mind you, it comes as something of a disappointment to me to find that the only thing that seems to grow in Yorkshire is rhubarb. Not to worry. From the Garden of England to the Garden of Eden, and a statue of Adam and Eve carved from a huge chunk of wood dredged up from the bottom of the River Mersey. The trouble with all present-day Gardens of Eden is that they're inclined to be on the small side, and that makes fitting in fruit and vegetables very difficult. Well, this stand offers you some brilliant ideas. Salad crops, lettuces and such like, intricately embroidered with herbs and other goodies, and there's even an apple tree. Oh yes, there is. It's a very small one, but here it is. It's called a step-over tree, a single-tier espalier on a dwarfing rootstock carrying about 20 apples, and that's no bad crop for something no more than a foot high. Now, it's not every year we get a new apple, and it's about once every 50 years that we get a new cooking apple. But that's what's happening this autumn with the arrival of a new variety called Bountiful. Its parents are Cox's Orange Pippin and Lane's Prince Albert, and that Cox blood in it means that it's very sweet. So if you're particularly calorie conscious, how about an apple flan like this made from Bountiful? You don't need to add any extra sugar nor any pastry on the top, and that means you can keep your weight down a treat. From apple flan to strawberry flan. The trouble with the strawberry is that it's never been a very attractive plant except when in fruit. But now, thanks to the work of a retired plant breeder down in Kent, we've got a new strawberry. He crossed it with a potentilla to give us pink flowers. As yet, it's not cropped and not been named, but I suspect it's in for a rosy future as a garden flower. Just like these strawberries are growing in hanging baskets. Now there's a bonny way of cultivating them.
A leading Sunday newspaper set as its competition this year to design a back garden where the division between the small living room and the backyard were merging. And Jean Bishop of Purbright in Surrey came second and skillfully used just a few white and yellow flowers so that the shallow garden wasn't exaggerated. And the winner? He was Russell Davidson from Prestwick in Scotland. He even had a little terraced, secluded area in one corner. But the great skill was the use of the blinds, which flowed from the garden right the way into the room, and also matching tiles on the floor. Old French roses grown by John Scarman of Stafford, suitable for clay soil, and the whole garden designed for clay. That'll be of common interest. By Jane Fernley Whittingstall. She actually studied garden design at Cheltenham College while the children were away at school, and pulled in a bit of local support because the garden furniture and plant supports were designed by Charles Veary from Barnsley. And the local blacksmith, he was called in to design the birds. He doesn't get a credit here actually because they didn't know they were going to arrive. They just came at the very last moment. A nice wooden chalet to set off the conifers if you've got £1,000 or £1,800 to spare. And Adrian Bloom this year has decided that the conifers look better outside without the loss of light through canvas, and quite a nice design idea with the raised edging and the slow and dwarf conifers just growing gently over the top. And whilst we talk about these for attractive colour year round, it's in May and June with the new growth when they really do look attractive. And there's quite a news story too. Last Thursday in New Zealand, 3 conifers were lifted, flown by jumbo jet to Gatwick, through customs and plant health, and then by helicopter to Battersea Park and up the river by launch to be here Monday morning. Fortunately, the Thuja doesn't suffer with jet lag. It had 2 lots of growth in the summer in New Zealand, where it's autumn now, and now through this summer they'll be growing again lovely yellow tips on Thuja orientalis golden ball.
Ask any nurseryman what makes a bestseller, and he'll probably say a plant that's small and a plant that's bright. And the brand new Spirea Golden Princess certainly fulfills both those requirements, so it looks as though it's got a promising future ahead of it. But it likes sunshine, so what do you do if you've got a shady corner? Answer: you go to the new varieties of Japanese hosta, leaves 10 times smaller than your average variety, but just as fresh and juicy. And if you want flower colour, then a candelabra primula like Roalane with deep blushing blooms carried in splendid tiers. But to go really upmarket, you should go in for variegated plants. And in that shady corner under the tree, nothing is really brighter of leaf than variegated Solomon's seal. Looks almost as though someone's taken a fine paintbrush, dipped it in gold paint, and gone round the edge of every leaf.
One very definite trend or fashion in gardening is trying to recreate that old cottage feel. And of course it wouldn't be a cottage garden without some of those old English roses. Soon after we were married in our country cottage, they said you had to have roses over the door. It wasn't Himalayan musk. And some of those old-fashioned roses tend to get a bit of mildew and flower in a bit of a heap. But there are lovely fragrant ones too. And even though they are old-fashioned, we have new varieties, and the international dress designers, the Emmanuels, came to Chelsea for the first time last year and were so taken with the old English roses that the grower said, wouldn't they like one named after them? And here it is, Emmanuel. Actually, one of the nursery hands said it's a bit blousy, the bloom, but lovely fragrance. Grows on bushes about 4 feet high and spreads to about 4 feet. The green cut-leaved aces are a bit of exhibitor's license here. Iris Germanica like full sun, really. And they come in many subtle colours and all have that lovely characteristic flag iris smell. Lupins from Stratford-on-Avon, and if you sow the seeds now, it's just the right time, about 10,000 and you may have one as good as the varieties here. Absolutely beautiful spikes, just 2 years old, cuttings taken last year, and their whole life spent in pots. And then from Sealand in Chester, this lovely traditional collection of peonies, astilbes and lilies. This is a stand that visitors over the years have come to expect, and they say it has that sort of lovely tranquil feel. It's lovely to see these things again. And the lilies, several different varieties, all flowering at the same time, but of course for that real cottage garden feel, the Madonna lilies, Lilium candidum. About 6 or 8 weeks' time, we'll be enjoying those in our own gardens.
The trouble with flower arrangers is that they will keep snipping bits off your most prized specimens. But if the results turn out like this, the work of the Surrey area of the National Association of Flower Arrangement Societies, well, I suppose you can forgive them. But the professional florists who send parcels of flowers through the post have no such difficulties. They can snip where they like to create brilliant arrangements, but of course they cost just a little bit more. But nearby, the florists are in competition to show what they can do for you on a more modest budget. A corsage for an evening out, or a Victorian posy for a blushing bridesmaid.
Acer Naganda, the variegated box elder. What would nurserymen do without them? They appear in so many stands, and they're useful here in the biggest stand in the main marquee, coming from the nursery with the largest collection of plants in the world. And not only the biggest library of varieties, but also super quality. They're rhododendrons, absolutely full out, masses of flower. And the hostas, they get bigger every year and tastefully arranged too, around that black polythene-lined pool to get the reflections in the water. And then the Prunus Kanzan, usually it's dropping its petals by this time, but with the late season, that's in full flower, and beneath it, the viburnums. Sorry we can't send you the fragrance, you'll have to come here to test that for yourself. And right in the middle of their stand, a taste of what's coming in the future. Next year, for 6 months, in Stoke, it's the National Garden Festival, and they're busy now, building a street of terraced houses. And in front of those, there'll be 11 fitted gardens, and one of them will be just as we see here. So if you've got a plot 20 by 20 out front, and you fancy, for example, a pergola with the climbing plants and a very nice paved area to sit out on, this could be the place to start. And there are things for the enthusiasts, a little rock garden perhaps, and the flower arrangers. They could have quite a nice mix of shrubs and herbaceous plants to give seasonal colour. And then the paving goes across to shingle, very tastefully edged with red brick. Just 20 foot square, remember, and a little circular bed close to the gate, ground cover beneath and ferns, and then the aces again with those lovely tiered branches.
You might have to be patient for a minute or two, but you can actually get right up to the gardens to have a good look at what's going on. One or two of them even have pathways that wend their way through, so you can really get into close-up and find out just how they piece together the trees, the shrubs, the plants and the rock work. One or two might be simply pipe dreams, others have ideas that you really can copy at home. There's nothing like a drop of water for attracting a crowd, and it's nice to see a bit of informality. A little rill making its way down over boulders between grass to a circular pool where irises and other bog lovers luxuriate in the moisture. But it's water, water everywhere, and not a drop to drink for the other plants in the garden, unless you've been wise like this landscaper and installed your very own pop-up irrigation system. At the press of a button, up they come to soak the plants, including that circle of delightful Tolmia Tufts Gold sitting there underneath the tree.
6 months ago, the timber in the mill house was standing green, and it's been cut, prepared, and then of course in the last 3 weeks the house built, and the mill wheel too, built in a traditional beam style in wood. And this on the trophy-winning stand sponsored by a leading high street retailer. David Stevens is the designer, and he's particularly keen on the 2 rhododendrons, the big ones, that the staff have come to call Bill and Ben. And you need some big plants on a garden like this to really give it some sort of impact. And in the judges this year, they've had a landscape contractor to keep an eye on the craftsmanship with the brickwork and the stone laying. And very well done it's been too. And the aces, quite a number coming in from New Zealand, so they're becoming easier to get. And of course those lovely yellow deciduous azaleas. Nice fragrance coming from those. And the white marguerites, beautiful blending of evergreens and shrubs, right down to the herbaceous border. A really quite magnificent exhibit, don't you think?
I wish I were a gambling man, because I reckoned that this would win the trophy. I'm delighted to see it has, and I've missed out on a few bob there. I asked David Stevens if he could come and build it at home for me when he finished here, but he wanted rather too much money for it, so I'll forgo that.
Well, now, what about you then? I mean, you're going to go for that trophy next year?
No fear. I'm looking forward to a good night's sleep, getting up at 4 in the morning and going to bed at 11 for about a fortnight. No, I'll settle with my gold quite happily and look forward to maybe 2 years' time coming back again and enjoying this 3-week building period that really involves you with Chelsea, and then you have a week of resting a bit and feasting your eyes on this floral glory.
Well, I'll tell you, on Sunday you can have another treat, because it was the Floralies in Ghent earlier this year, and on BBC Two on Sunday we'll be bringing you the highlights from that show. So from Chelsea, Alan and I, good night.
Good night.